My name is Jamal Binding. I'm the president of the Moore Board of Directors. Moore stands for Movement in Omaha for Race Equity. And one of the things that we do is facilitate meetings between community members, stakeholders, and area professionals who deal with issues related to our community as well as racial issues. This event that we're sponsoring tonight is a community forum with the Foster Care Review Office, and they're going to talk a little bit more about their services, and then we'll open up to the public. We've invited Monica Gross, who's the executive director of the Foster Care Review Office, to talk about some of their operations. What do they do? Primarily, how do they serve families and children in our state, as well as share with us some of the demographics. Monica Gross has been working in many years in child welfare and has a lot of experience, and so we're kind of excited to bring this event to the community, both in Facebook as well as Zoom Live. And we also have with us today is Heather Wood, who's a research director who's been there almost a year. And she will talk about some of the current situations related to the data. One of the things that we've been very impressed with the Foster Care Review Office is they have provided some racialized data and helped us to deconstruct some of the problems that face many people of color. As you know, Moore's primary interest is addressing and eliminating racism, and that requires that we at least have to define it and talk about it. And we also need to define some of these organizations that serve families of color, and particularly when they enter the child welfare or the juvenile justice system or the prison system in disproportionate numbers, or an education system where they're not doing as well. We need to have agencies and organizations that can again talk about it, but also do it in such a level of having civility as well as a sense of professionalism to see outcomes. What we've run into at Moore is that many organizations do not produce racialized data, nor do they produce data about poverty. So our goal is to, again, to host some of those events, challenge the status quos in our community, but more than anything, get people to use the concept of dialogue, conversations, and civility versus isolation and so on. We also are excited that the fact that people can join into these conversations and raise these issues, which is what this event is for us today. You will hear a number of comments, hopefully from people who can share their points of view, but more than anything, to help us deconstruct how we can make the Foster Care Review Office better, but how does the Foster Care Review Office work with other entities in our community. We look forward to the presenters sharing their expertise, but more than anything, we know that there will probably be a follow-up because there are many questions that will probably be unanswered from some of the dialogue that takes place today. If you want more information about Moore, check out our website. We have a number of activities that are going on, as well as some information for those who want to get involved in race equity and anti-racism training and racism issues. So we look forward to you participating tonight, and we look forward to more endeavors related to race equity and so on.
I'm going to go ahead and start and go through the first little bit and then turn it over to Heather when we get to the data portion. So I gave a little bit of an introduction about myself, but I didn't really talk about the Foster Care Review Office. So some of you may be very aware of the role and responsibilities of the Foster Care Review Office, since this may be new to some of you. So I want to be sure that everybody has the same information. Heather, if you want to go ahead and advance the slide. So we do at the Foster Care Review Office, we do have a mission statement, and we do have a vision. We have a vision that every child involved in the child welfare or juvenile justice system will become resilient, safe, healthy, and economically secure. And in our mission, in order to achieve that vision, our mission is that we provide oversight to the child welfare and juvenile justice systems by tracking and reviewing children who are in out-of-home care or foster care. And we report on aggregate outcomes and advocate on individual and the systemic levels to ensure that children's best interests and safety needs are met. So we do a number of things there in that mission statement, and it all boils down to providing oversight, providing reporting, and advocacy on behalf of children and families. So next slide, please. So who is the Foster Care Review Office? We are an independent state agency, and sometimes it's easier to describe who we are not. So we are not part of the Department of Health and Human Services. We're a separate agency. We are not part of the courts. We're not part of the executive branch, so we do not report to the governor. And we're not a private entity, we are a government entity. We receive our funding from the Nebraska legislature through appropriations of general funds, which means that we are funded by Nebraska taxpayer dollars. We do receive a small amount of federal funds because we play a role in the state's process of reviewing cases, and part of that is funded by the federal government under Title IV-E of the Social Security Act. We submit reports directly to the courts on individual cases. We submit annual and quarterly reports directly to the Nebraska legislature, and those reports are available to the public on our website, and they are also available on the legislature's website. We have offices in Lincoln and Omaha. Our main office is in Lincoln, and that's where my office is located. We also have an office in Omaha in the Omaha State Office building downtown. And we have approximately 10 staff who are assigned to that Omaha office. And then we also have staff who are located throughout the state who work remotely and have done that for years. We have staff in North Platte, the Kearney area, Grand Island area, and the Columbus area. So next slide, please. So we have several duties that are outlined in the Nebraska statutes, and particularly in Nebraska Revised Statute section 43-1302. But there are a series of statutes that describe and mandate and authorize the work of the Foster Care Review Office. So it kind of follows along with our mission statement. We have the official tracking system for children in out-of-home care or foster care. We sometimes use those terms interchangeably. Foster care is our definition of foster care is broader than just traditional or relative foster homes, to include things like group homes and other congregate care facilities. We have oversight over the foster care system and children who are in out-of-home care. We review cases, individual cases of children who are in foster care, and we do that through the use of local volunteer citizen review boards. And we'll talk a little bit more about the boards later on, but that's how our reviews are accomplished. We do have staff who do the initial reviews of the cases, and then there are local board meetings where those cases are reviewed. And then a report is generated, a report to the court with recommendations. We also make reports and recommendations in those annual and quarterly reports to the Department of Health and Human Services and the legislature. And yes, we do track the juveniles who are in the YRTCs. So Geneva, I believe, is now closed. So there are YRTCs, or Youth Rehabilitation and Treatment Centers, in Kearney for the boys, in Hastings for girls. And then there's also a Lincoln location that is used for, I think, special populations of youth. And we do review those youth as well if they meet the other criteria, if they've been in out-of-home care for 6 months or more. And then we also provide advocacy on that individual case level and on the system level. So we do have staff who attend court as they are able or as needed, and are able to advocate in court on behalf of the local boards. And then on the systemic level, our reports to the legislature and special reports that we issue from time to time, and also through testimony to and briefings to legislative committees. And also, I would say this is another form of advocacy, what we're doing right now, which is to help raise awareness and help educate and share the data that we collect with the public. So next slide, please. Ajamal asked us to talk a little bit about our budget. So we have a total annual budget of $2,771,912 for the current fiscal year. And as you can see, the vast majority of that goes to salaries and benefits for our 28 staff. And we also have approximately $600,000 in operating expenses. And that goes to pay things like rent for our offices and our office supplies and our telephones and things like that. $400,000 of that $600,000 in operating expenses is for data processing, because we do have our own data system, and it requires a lot of maintenance, constant updates, and we're always upgrading it as well. And some of those funds we've had carried over from previous fiscal years because the programmers that work for the state in the Office of the Chief Information Officer have they just can't keep up with the amount of work that we have for them. So they're doing their best, and we're really making some progress, but it's a constant, it's something that's a constant, and it's an expensive service to provide. We also have some travel expenses. That $56,000 in travel expenses includes about $40,000 for our staff mileage. In previous years, prior to the pandemic, our staff did a lot of driving around, driving to local board meetings, driving to court in different communities. A lot of that kind of stopped when the pandemic hit and everything kind of shut down. A lot of court hearings have been and are held over Zoom. Our local board meetings are being held over Zoom. A lot of the community type meetings that our staff attended are also happening over Zoom or some other type of video conferencing. So the amount of money that we actually spend on travel has been pretty minimal the last couple of years, just because folks are not traveling. And then we have a capital expenditure, which really the only capital expense we have is for computers. And some of our computers are about 6 years old now and are starting to show their age and are just not up to snuff. So we do have to replace that equipment from time to time. And so that's what that line is all about. So hopefully I explained that pretty well for you, so you have some insight into our operations. Next slide, please. So the 28 staff that we employ includes myself and Heather, and we have in the research department, we have Heather, who's the research director, and then she has 2 staff. So all of this data that is being reported on tonight is really kind of crunched and put together by 3 staff people. The research department is also responsible for reviewing the Bridge to Independence cases, and those are the cases of young adults who are in what's sometimes called extended foster care till age 21. We do review those cases, but we don't report on the data on those cases because those are adults. We have staff in Omaha and Lincoln that are each of those offices. The staff is led by a regional program manager, and in each office we have 9 full-time system oversight specialists who are responsible for reviewing the cases and summarizing the cases for the local boards. They also facilitate all the local board meetings Each oversight specialist facilitates 3 board meetings every month, and they review they review 4 to 5 cases per board per month. Except for the probation, we have one specialist who facilitates probation only boards. And there are 2 of those boards, and they review approximately 30 cases a month. And that's because there aren't as many parties to those cases, and they can do them a lot quicker. They can get through those reviews a lot quicker. We have a administrative program officer who is kind of she handles all of our business processes in the office, things like accounting, things like human resources, things that keep the office functioning. She makes sure that the bills get paid, that timesheets and payroll gets processed, and things like that. She also completes all of our budget forms and makes sure that we stay on track on our budget. And then we have 2 administrative support specialists, and we have a training coordinator, Mary, and I saw Mary's name, but she's here with us tonight. She is responsible for recruiting and onboarding and training all of our volunteers. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit, but that's a big job. And she also tracks a lot of information on board attendance and things like that, does some background checks on volunteers, and just makes sure that our whole volunteer force continues to operate smoothly. So next slide, please. One thing I forgot to mention on the other slide also is that our governing board is called the Advisory Committee, and there are 5 members of the Advisory Committee. They are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature. 3 of those Advisory Committee members are members of local boards, so they review cases. We have 1 member who is a data expert, and then 1 at-large member. We currently have 53 local boards statewide. 2 of those boards review only probation cases, and 24 of those local boards are located in Omaha and review mostly Eastern Service Area cases. Each of our local boards has between, this says 5 and 7, we have a minimum of 4 trained volunteers on the board, and they review those 4 to 5 cases every month. And we would love to have more volunteers. And there are some requirements. You can locate the applications on our website. It's really easy to find. It says, volunteer for a local board, and you can click on that and the applications are available. We would love to diversify our boards. Currently our local boards are not as diverse as we would like. Volunteers can come from all kinds of different backgrounds. We have some full-time parents. We have retirees. We have teachers, doctors, nurses, therapists. We have lawyers. We have retired military. So there's really no limit on backgrounds, as far as what kind of expertise you can bring to the local boards. And we really need more men, and we really need more people of color to adequately represent the population of the state of Nebraska. There is a training requirement, and Mary Furness, our training coordinator, provides that training. And there are ongoing training requirements as well, in-service training. And those requirements are usually pretty easy to meet because there's usually a lot of training that's available. So I think with that, we can go to the next slide. We are glad to be here, and Okay, there's a question about recruiting board members. We use a variety of different methods to recruit. A lot of it is word of mouth. Volunteers refer other volunteers. Sometimes our system oversight specialists recruit volunteers from the community. We are on Volunteer Match, which is a website where folks can go if they're interested in volunteering, and they can look for volunteer opportunities. We do get a lot of our volunteers that way. So there's a variety of different sources. And what we're doing now, I mean, recruitment has been more difficult during the pandemic, and we've also seen a lot more turnover in our volunteer base during the pandemic for a variety of reasons. But we are glad to be here. We value these kinds of opportunities. And we would love to show you our data and answer your questions and engage in some conversations.
So I know that we have some slides to go through, and some of the ones that I have, Monica's really already touched on, so I'll move through those pretty quickly. I wanted to start with this quote, though, by Jay Bears, and he's sort of a renowned expert in marketing and consumer experience or customer experience. But I can really relate to this quote. We are surrounded by data, but starved for insights. And so to me, what it means is really the data that we have is only as good as we can help to bring it to communities, as we can help to actually allow and inspire change. And the way that we can do it is challenging. Certainly alone, just within the confines of our agency, which really, again, just feeling the need to be able to get out and share that information is critical. So Monica and I have had several opportunities to get out and to present to different organizations, to different community groups, to different agencies. This is just a list of some of those. And so again, just thank you for the opportunity to come and to present to this community forum. So really what our hope is that we can help to supply the data, not just today, but in an ongoing way, so that that way our collective knowledge can come together, so that that way it actually means something. We have a number of different reporting requirements, a lot of counts, a lot of trends. Well, how does that compare this year from last year? Or how does that compare over the past year, month over month? How many, what length of time, things of that nature. But we're also required to do an analysis of the data. And that requires more than just the counts, more than just the statistics. It requires being able to understand the system. It requires being able to have the experience as part of the story, so that the recommendations that we put forth to the legislature really are truly relevant and can be the most positively impactful for the children and families who are involved in both the child welfare as well as the juvenile justice systems. We make recommendations to a number of different entities at any given time in our reports. It may be to the legislature. It may be for a collaborative effort across agencies, or it may be a single effort that we're recommending for a particular agency, such as the Department of Health and Human Services, the Administrative Office of the Courts and Probation, or the court system. And we use our system oversight specialist review to be able to aid in that ability for doing those case file reviews, for making those individual recommendations, but also they are the heart of really where most of our data is coming from. So we get a data feed from the Department of Health and Human Services. That information provides us information as required on all of the children and youth who are in and out of home care placement. We also receive information on informal living arrangements. We receive information from probation in a weekly file with updates and with new cases of youth who have gone into an out of home care placement. But that being said, that is really enlightened or enhanced by the work of our staff that go in and that do research, that get information through questionnaires, through the course of them preparing and being ready to do the reviews with the boards on those individual children and youth cases. So that's really what our data set represents, and what makes it so unique is there isn't another agency that actually has the entirety of all out-of-home care cases and children at any given time. So this allows us to look at point in time. It allows us to look over a certain reporting period. It allows us to offer that information for the comprehensive set of out-of-home care across the state of Nebraska and across different communities. So one of the ways that we're often reflecting on our data is, where are the kids coming from? So this is an example of a map, being able to identify across the state how many children and youth are coming from each of the different counties. So that's a collection of information, and also then how does that compare to last year? And we have seen an uptick in the number of children in out-of-home care since last year. And often it's expected that's going to be some impact from COVID. But that being said, we always want to just report out the information and really use the conversations to help drive some of that inference. We, by and large, have data that is on children who are only involved with children and family services. So this graph represents the involvement, the agency type involvement for all of these kids. So for this particular chart, this was in our September 2021 annual report. And so it actually describes that agency involvement for all of those children and youth in out-of-home care. So you can see 84.1% were only involved with children and family services. A much smaller, though our second largest population, is only involved with probation at 8.9%. So a really distinct population size difference there. But we also have, and again, this comes back to the unique nature of the information and our reporting capacity, we have the ability to report out on youth who are involved in multiple agencies, such as our dual or our children and family services and probation involved youth, as well as those who would be at a youth rehabilitation and treatment center, in addition to having involvement in being supervised by probation. So that's a distinct area that we're able to offer data that differs from any of the other agencies. And again, which really makes our data and our information that we can bring to the table very unique. So children can come in and out. Again, this is a point in time where they were shown or described as being involved with their out-of-home care placement at that particular time on June 30th, 2021. But kids can come in and out of the system. They can change from one agency to another agency at time. Their placement types change. So we're able to track all of that activity through the information that we receive from Children and Family Services, as well as from probation. But again, all of that information is updated and added to for a more comprehensive, more accurate, more timely reflection of that activity by the work of our staff as they're digging in and really getting all of this information from all interested parties, legal parties, as well as their own review of documentation that takes a far deeper drill down into some of the things that aren't very easily quantifiable. So over the fiscal year 21, there was actually 6,792 children who were described as in and out of home care or trial home placement for at least one day. So it's a large volume of kids who our system, our foster care tracking system, has data available on, and that we are responsible for tracking throughout the year. So as Ajamal had mentioned earlier, understanding that anti-racism is really a focus for this group, wanting to bring forth some of the information. And this was really striking to me coming in, being new to this. So I'm just going to describe what this chart or series of charts rather represents. So if we look at only those children who have an involvement on that particular date of June 30th, 2021. So this is information shared in our annual report for the statewide numbers. Looking only at those particular children involved with Children and Family Services as compared to what would be expected across the state, and breaking that down by the race categories used by the census. So looking at categories of Hispanic or our non-Hispanic race categories of going in alphabetical order, American Indian, non-Hispanic, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander grouped together, always small representations across those three. Non-Hispanic, we have Black non-Hispanic, Hispanic already mentioned, 2 or more races non-Hispanic, where 2 or more races would have been indicated within our data system, and then white non-Hispanic. And so what we do is we look at what are those particular race categories for the children who are actually in out-of-home care, and how do those compare to what is estimated by the census for that same age group, those same race categories in the general population. And what we continue to find is this overrepresentation of children of color in American Indian. You can see we have 4 times the representation of American Indian non-Hispanic children who are wards as compared to 1.1% of the general population children statewide. And we see a similar type of overrepresentation with the Black non-Hispanic, nearly 3 times the overrepresentation there, as well as with 2 or more races. So one of the things that we can also do is look at that specific to a given service area. So for instance, Eastern Service Area, which is made up of Douglas and Sarpy counties. So if we look at that area, we see some slight differences, but the same general pattern there, where we're seeing this overrepresentation of nearly 3 times with the American Indian, and then again, 3 times with the Black non-Hispanic, and twice for the 2 or more races non-Hispanic. And again, that's specific for the Eastern Service Area, with how those, how the population in out-of-home care with Children and Family Services would compare against in Eastern Service Area, what is just estimated for those populations of children by the race categories. So I think that this is really interesting. And I think that it helps to be able to understand some of the problems that exist. That being said, we're limited to know, or we're limited in knowing how this came to be. We have information once they come into that out-of-home care. They've been removed, they're in those out-of-home care placements. But what we don't have is information on children who may be through a tribal court. So that percentage of the American Indian, 4 times the rate, well, we know that that's actually even more than that of children who are in out-of-home placements, because we don't even have tracking for those who are in and out-of-home placement through the tribal courts. So we know that that's even further disproportionate to what the actual estimate for the age group in that particular race category would be expected for the population. So while we don't have information on the calls coming into the helpline, for instance, or how all of these children are coming into, I think that it's important to be able to have this as a starting point and try and work our way back. And that's where the collective experience, the collective conversation, discussing things and having a starting point to do it, while we may not have all the answers or the insights, we certainly have a lot of data to help start conversations and to be able to have a framework of being able to show something that needs to be addressed. One of the things that we do have within our data set actually relates to the reasons that children would have come into care. So why they would have been removed from the home or from the placement. So what was that reason for entering an out-of-home care placement? And so we do have information about that. So this chart actually shows, so as the court has made a decision and a ruling, what are those adjudicated reasons that got put into part of that court order as the reason that that child entered into an out-of-home care placement. Neglect is a very broad term, and it's a very broad area, and you can see over half of the over half of the reasons rather do indicate neglect. Children may have multiple reasons though, that would be included here across the board. There could be a singular reason, or a judge could determine that there are multiple things that actually played into the decision to have that child enter into an out-of-home care placement. So that's the data that I brought, and I can certainly always circle back to any of these slides with questions. And as we want to kind of dig into this with the conversation, but again, it's really trying to be able to have awareness of who the foster care review office is, what our staff have means and have access to being able to offer in terms of advocacy at an individual and systemic level, and also what data fields, what data information do we have that if there are questions, again, we can help to equip groups across the communities of Nebraska to be able to start to have and formulate questions that really hope to inspire action because of that shared knowledge.
So we're about ready to open it up then?
Yep, that's our last question. We've got our contact here at the last slide, and I can certainly stop my share if that makes things easier. I'll follow your lead, Ajamal.
Good. Let me start out by saying, and I want to be somewhat apologetic. One of the things that I saw a number of questions and issues that came in the chat, and I don't know if some of them were direct to everyone, but one of the things that we're conscious at Moore is I really want to make this much more of a dialogue or feedback. And if there's some drill in the weeds questions or issues that you have to do individually, Monica and Heather are available for that. But one of the challenges that I face, and I say this very respectfully, is that when you do a community formative issue, there's some things that are presented that the participants have no control over or doesn't affect them in a situation. So one of the things we like to do is get quickly to the questions. Again, our goal is not to embarrass anyone, but to say, if we're serious about engaging folks and changing these systems, it means we have to talk to each other differently. So with that, I think there are a number of points that were raised, and I don't know, Heather or Monica, if you saw some of those that came in the chat, we could start with that. But one of the first questions I would just have before we get into that is, I noticed that your office staff in Lincoln and in Omaha are proportionally equal, even though you got 3 times the number of people in the system in Omaha. So is there some sense of maybe changing that situation? And how do you deal with statewide folks? Because I can tell by the way the matrix is laid out, you're almost divided equally. But again, that's one of the criticisms we have in Omaha. If most of the challenges or problems are in our area, why is it the state office or people in Lincoln have a disproportionate number of those services based in Lincoln? And again, it could be a policy issue, but maybe you can allude to that or respond to that. And then we'll go to each one of those chat or comments that came in from our participants.
Well, I don't know that it's true that 3 times as many children are in out-of-home care in Omaha. It looks to me like about 45% of the children in out-of-home care are in the Eastern Service Area. And so those staff in Omaha cover the Eastern Service Area, and then some of the surrounding counties, they also review cases from like Washington, Cass, Otoe County, just kind of depending on the need and the numbers. So the staff that cover the rest of the state are covering 55% of the children in out-of-home care. So I feel like it's pretty well balanced in that way. And I'm sorry, was there another part to your question?
Well, my issue with proportional numbers, I saw one of the charts that had some of the numbers that was like more than other numbers. I'm wondering, how do you break those percentages? But we can move on to another. There's some other questions here. Let's move on to some of the other questions in the chat.
Yeah, do you want me to read them, or how do
let me highlight, maybe because some people, Mark raised the issue about Native American percentage of out-of-home Native American homes, and he said that in many times the Native Americans are so high in terms of compared to white children and so on. This is to carry on when our government overtly sanctioned the removal of Native American from their homes. So does our foster care office play a role in what we've historically done in terms of treatment of Native Americans? And that's from Mark Welch.
Yeah, so the Native American children are disproportionately represented in out-of-home care. They are in many states, they're the most, and Nebraska is no exception, they are the most disproportionately represented group. And as Heather said, we very likely have an undercount even within our state system, because some of those some of those described as 2 or more races could very well be Native American children as well. And again, we do not have any, we do not review tribal court data, children who are in out-of-home placement under the tribal courts. And so very likely that would push that that disparity even higher. But we don't know what those figures are, because we don't review those cases and we don't have access to that data.
You know, we have a small group. I wonder if we could do direct questions directly from the participants. Do folks have, we don't have that opportunity here? Could people unmute and talk directly or raise a question directly to the two guests or the presenters? Do we have that option here?
I think we do, Ajmal. There are a couple of questions. Rachel raised her hand, and there are a couple of questions about data that she had.
Okay, so Rachel, want to raise them directly then, or do we want to just read it?
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, I can go ahead and speak directly. So it's very obvious that we are seeing race-based disproportionalities. And I think everyone here knows that race-neutral policies and race-neutral recommendations will continue reproducing these numbers due to racism at the individual level, institutional level, and systemic level. So I'm wondering if you can speak to what race-focused recommendations the FCRO has been able to make and hopefully see change in to directly combat this racism that are creating these numbers.
Well, that's a good question. You know, I guess I'm afraid I don't have a really good answer to that. We have had a recommendation, I think, that's been around for several years, that the agencies who are who the child welfare and juvenile justice agencies who are responsible for the children in out-of-home care need to review their policies, look at their policies and their practices and their processes to address this issue. But I have to say, we have not gotten more specific than that.
Okay.
So I would honestly be open to, you know, if you have recommendations or suggestions for us that would get to the root of the disproportionality issues, I would be open to that.
Good. Other questions, other feedback? I see the one from about St. Francis. So what has been reported about St. Francis? This is from Mark Harvard Schultz. Anything with St. Francis, any comments with your office related to their situation?
So as far as our reports, we don't necessarily report specifically about St. Francis or any other private entity. The focus is usually more on DHHS and the courts, and but we do make some sort of multi-system stakeholder recommendations. As far as St. Francis, we have looked at and broken down our data by service area because we were getting a lot of requests for that. So if you look at the annual report, we do have more of our data broken down by service area than in previous reports for that reason. We have also testified before the legislature's investigative and oversight committee for the Eastern Service Area. We were asked to provide a briefing on kind of the history and the current quality of care as we were seeing it in our case reviews. We do talk about in the annual report some of the lack of documentation, which is something that we have been seeing over the last couple of years. and how that impacts not just our ability to review the case and make recommendations to the court on the individual cases, but it also impacts the aggregate data. Because if we have a large percentage of the cases where we don't have the information, where the information is missing, lack of documentation, where we can't make a determination whether or not a particular service was provided, whether children have seen the doctor, whether they're making progress in school because that information is not documented in the case file, then it can potentially skew the rest of the data that we are reporting. So it is a concern, and we have raised that concern both with the Department of Health and Human Services, with St. Francis directly, and in our annual and quarterly reports.
Lucia has a question. Lucia?
Yeah, you mentioned that with your data, there's reporting, and I was wondering, in addition to your reporting, how do you utilize your data and recommend actions or make different recommendations, or is it mostly done through your reporting mechanism?
Mostly our recommendations are made in our annual and quarterly reports. If we are asked, for example, by senators or by the Health and Human Services Committee of the legislature or DHHS, they do also ask us for recommendations from time to time. So it's done that way. But normally it is tied to our data reports that come out quarterly.
Maggie, I see you have your hand up, Maggie.
Thanks. So thank you for all of this information and the dialogue along with it. Everything that I keep hearing, and back when I worked for DHHS, what our goal was always in mind was to try to keep kids in the home whenever possible, you know, to safety plan around that. Obviously you're not dealing with those kids, right? I mean, they might come in and out of foster care, but you're dealing with what happens to the kids who are not staying in the home. For, you know, the length of time that you've been with the foster care review office, are there any things that stick out to you that, I don't want to say that like workers aren't doing, but are there challenges that you see that keep kids from being able to stay in the home? Are you seeing fewer kids overall, like over the years, being taken out of the home, or is it pretty much the same? Is it proportionate? Just tell me about that.
I think if you look at it over time, from the state of Nebraska's historic high, which was probably in about 2007, 2006, somewhere in there, we are well below that. We are probably like less than half of where we were at that point in time, kids out of home. So I think as a whole, as a state, we're doing a better job of supporting kids and families in their own homes. Now, having said that, you know, there's still a lot of work to do. We still have a long ways to go, and I think there are lots of opportunities within our local communities to support kids and families and prevent placement out of home. And you know, we at the Foster Care Review Office do strongly support children staying with their families whenever it's safe to do so. And so, you know, and if a child has to be placed out of home, it should be for the least amount of time necessary in order to address the issues that brought the child into out-of-home care and make it safe for that child to go back home.
And to kind of follow up to that, do you see that white children, non-Hispanic white children are more likely to get to stay in the home, or is it reflective of what we see in out-of-home placement?
Well, because we don't have access to in-home data, children in home, other than those who have been out of home and then returned home for what's called a trial home visit. we don't have anything to compare it to. So all we have is data on children who are in out-of-home care.
Who does have that data? Sorry, that's my last follow-up
So
question.
that would be the Department of Health and Human Services.
And I was just going to add, I think that's why it's so important to bring people together, because it's rare that any one entity has all the data, has all the answers, has all the ideas. And that's the beauty in this type of forum, is being able to have questions that we hadn't thought of, or being able to be given feedback or suggestions, particularly being new in my role. You know, it's sort of this vast opportunity of being able to find a new vision for how we bring about data and how we are able to share that data. One of the things that we have been working really hard on during the time that I've been there is being able to learn different methods of being able to get data dashboards so that we can actually publish them out to our website. And the vision is that those data dashboards will include maps and allow you to filter down to a particular county or a particular service area or a particular judicial district and be able to get counts in a moment. And now, granted, that's based on our basic kind of quarterly data pull and not having it live or, you know, real time with what that is. But our hope is just to continue to improve that process. And Rachel, I saw a comment from you about, you know, looking at things per rates of 1,000. And, you know, there are some people, and I know you're a data person, and so how sometimes we think of things is different than how someone else may read or interpret or want to have something. But I love that idea, because you're right. When we think about the percentage of children who are in out-of-home care, it's always going to be predominantly white, non-Hispanic children. And so those are the type of ideas that we're really open to, and we want to be able to draw from different community groups, different agencies, different organizations, with how can we use our data to put it together in a way that's going to help inform, that's going to help give you a reliable piece of information to use, that really there's not another source of that particular one. Even if it's just to start that conversation, to start to say who's not at the table, what information don't we have that we need to better understand what's really going on here, or be able to infer what's going on with more confidence.
Karen, I see your hands up. Karen?
Yeah, thank you. So I think if I recall the data on the slide correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, it was over 80% of cases come in because of neglect. And neglect is highly correlated with poverty, yet it's my understanding that HHS does not track income of the kids that are in out-of-home placement. I'm wondering if FCRO does, and what your thoughts are on that, because the economic bias is enormous in my mind.
So Karen, it was over 50% have neglect as one of the reasons that gets captured for that reason for coming into out-of-home care, 56.3 to be exact. But that being said, we don't have a lot of information on the parents. You know, as Monica had mentioned, there's a lot of missing or incomplete or unable to determine information on the kids. And that's the main focus of the data, really, that we're not only responsible for collecting, but that our focus is in order to do those reviews. What we have on even things like caseworker or, you know, race, ethnicity of the placements, we don't have that information unless our staff end up coming upon it, but we don't have it even captured then. So we're really limited on a lot of that background information. So if there are ideas, it doesn't mean that there aren't things that we couldn't try to add. But again, it's just, it's really focused on the kids, what we have, but that is really usually only half, if that, of the story, right?
Lucia, I see your hands up.
Yeah, hopefully I formulate my thought, because I'm learning a lot and processing a lot of information. But you shared that the review boards don't currently represent the communities and the populations that you serve. And I'm wondering if you see a difference in recommendations for similar cases where one of the differences was race.
I can't say that we really do see a difference in the recommendations. And, another thing to keep in mind is just because our board makes a recommendation doesn't mean that the court adopts it all the time. I can't really, and I don't know that we have tracked that either. I don't know that, we're somewhat limited by our staff, the number of staff that we have in the ability to be able to track and analyze all this data. We have a lot of data, much more data than we have the capacity at this point, the resources to analyze and report on. But that is an interesting, I think that's an interesting question and an interesting observation, and something that we can certainly see if we can take a look at analyzing that. I think that would be very interesting.
There's a question on raised, but it was related to that one. There's conversation today about a resource center in Omaha, and one of the key proponents are going to be working on was Project Harmony. And one of the issues I think that was raised in this meeting earlier today, but it also relates to this conversation, is if you don't have credible messages of people of color at the pipeline or in key positions, how can you address the issues from their perspective? So, for example, Doug, the Inspector General, I guess, who deals with correction, he comes out with a 100-page report, and it's so convoluted and academic that many grassroots folks would not read it. And again, it goes back to Monica, the conversation, your report. There's some areas that are very easy to discern or deal with. How can we make sure that what we write about, that there's a warm baton handed off to those advocacy or organizations that may be beyond our bell curve and work for the Foster Care Review Office? Because as I sit in many of these meetings as a professional or as a community person, some of the information is totally irrelevant or is convoluted to the point I don't know what you're talking about. So if I don't understand what you're talking about, what about the average family who has system-involved kids and so on? How do we make sure that if something is not constantly reported on year after year after year, that we're trying to address it by making sure the credible messages are either at our table or on our board? So how can we address that from Foster Care Review Office perspective? Crickets.
Well, I'm not, can you repeat the question? I kind of
What I'm
lost
saying
you.
is, how do we address issues if we don't have the very people who we're talking about at our table? How do we have these issues if our populations who are on our boards don't represent those respective children and families or community? How do we make sure when we write reports that it has kind of a flavor of that we're looking for outcomes basically on having changing our systems? Because right now, reports are written year after year, but we don't always reduce these numbers, or we oftentimes don't drill down to get more people at our table. This is one of the events that we hope to help do some of that, but the onus is on the respective offices to help us do that. So my question is, how do you help flatten the pyramid of your system so that we have more of the people who are involved as families at our tables and not just professional folks or people who, again, don't have family involved in these systems?
Well, I think one thing is we do get participation from families when we review cases. So when a child's case is being reviewed, we do invite the parents, the foster parents, and if the child is, I think, over the age of 12 or over, they are also invited to participate in the local board meeting or to provide feedback. We have a questionnaire that gets sent that they can fill out, and there are multiple avenues for them to be able to fill that out or to provide feedback. So we do elicit input from family members when individual cases are reviewed. And that input is then incorporated into the report and recommendations that go to the court. And that any information or data that's provided by those family members, then our staff can use that as they're completing their data form after they review the case. So there is that opportunity for input. I mean, we would, we look for opportunities like this one tonight to be able to speak with the community and receive the direct feedback. There's lots of good feedback in the chat tonight, and I'm hoping you can send that to me, Ajamal, afterward. so that we can use it to improve our processes, improve our reporting. One thing that we did this year that was a little different, before our annual report, we did send a survey out to our staff and to our local board members to get their input on, what should we include in our annual report? What would you like to see? Do you have suggestions for recommendations based on what you've seen in your reviews? And there was some really good feedback that we received from that. Now, I realize that's not from the community at large, but it is from the people who are doing the actual reviews. And then also after the annual report was submitted, we did send out a survey to, I think it was about 450 individuals. And these are individuals that receive our reports, that are on our email list. And we send a survey out to find out, are you reading the report? What parts of the report are you reading? What do you feel is the most, what do you find the most helpful, or, what could be improved? Those kinds of things. So we did get some feedback on that, and we intend to use that feedback then and incorporate it into our next reports to make them better. So, we can certainly do a survey like that again. We can do it every year, and we can certainly expand the number of recipients of that survey to incorporate all of you all.
Yeah, I really see
that would
it
be
as a
very helpful.
starting point.
Just a sec, Mark, I see you've been waiting for a while. Mark, can you come forward there? Mark, you have a question?
I guess a question, and I should preface it by saying that I served on a foster care review board for over 10 years and stepped down about 1.5 years ago, just before COVID. How many majority minority boards are there in the Omaha metropolitan area currently?
Mary might know the answer to that. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I can tell you that based on the latest data that I've seen, almost 90% of our board members across the state are white. And we recognize that that's an issue.
In those 10 years that I was on the board, I don't think we ever had more than 2 out of 6 or 7 members of the board that were minority in any shape or form, which was a concern. I mean, I taught and lived in a minority community, and at times I was the best representative that there was there, but that's not the same as having minorities on the board. I really think that you need to look seriously at some of the recommendations that are in the chat to get more minorities involved. I know that there's people out there that would do it.
Thank you, really appreciate it. The other follow-up I would say to that, Mark, is a lot of people don't know what they do. I mean, literally, if you don't know what they do, or you don't have any relationship with folks, and it's just like me being on the Nebraska Children's Commission, I only know about it when someone tells me about it. But when you sit in the room, it's a different kind of a feeling. And then the other issue I shared with one of the directors is that when you're the only African-American male in the room, or maybe the only African-American in general, it's a very awkward feeling when you're talking about children of color, or you have this kind of conversations that talk about people as the other. So we need to include more diversity, but really appreciate that.
The majority of the time, I was the only male on my board.
So that speaks to some great conversations here, folks, that we got to clean up our act here in Nebraska, but I really appreciate folks doing that. Are there other feedback or other questions from other folks? And we can call audible if we need to. So
I see there was a question in the chat from Rachel about whether we have data on who made reports to CPS. We don't have that data. We don't receive any of that data. There is a report report on the DHHS website called the CAN report, or the Child Abuse Neglect Report, and they post those annually. So there's data in that report that I would just refer you to that because it does have information about the sources of the reports.
Quick question. How do you know if you're doing a good job? I asked that question of a lot of professionals, and I know we look at the numbers, but how do you know if you're better than last year? Or how do you know that we're being effective, whether in the foster care review office or whatever? But it's a question I'm just asking up front.
When you say we, are you talking about the foster care review office? Are you, or, okay.
All of the above, whatever you want to answer. That's an open-winded question.
Well, obviously, we do look at different data metrics year over year and compare, you know, this year to last year. And so in some of those areas, we know if we're doing better or worse. You know, generally we look at things like, you know, how many children are in out of home care, how long have they been there, what is the length of time that it takes them to achieve permanency, how many youth do we have aging out of care that never achieve permanency. So those are some of the things that we look at. As far as the foster care review office, I can tell you that the state auditor looks at whether we review every case every 6 months, which is what our statute says. And they always seem to find over the years that we come up short. Well, we are not funded or staffed to be able to do that, to be able to review that volume of cases at that interval. I think the other issue is we try to review cases. We try to coincide our reviews with the next court hearing. So that's a little bit more complex. Now, if every court reviewed every case 6 months apart on the dot, it might make it a little bit easier, but it's really more of an art than a science at this point, where we try to make sure that each child gets reviewed at least once a year. And there are certain cases that our staff are aware of that they know they need to keep an eye on that case. So they'll request to review it in 6 months or, you know, before another year. So many cases do get reviewed every 6 months, but not all of them. And so that's one way that at least the state auditor looks at our whether we're making improvements or not. I don't know, Heather, do you have any other thoughts on that, whether we're doing better?
Well, like you said, there's a number of metrics that we look at time over time. But the thing I'm really interested in is, you know, when you are coming into a position and there's been sort of this history of what has been reported, what's been included in reports, and you see it grow and grow. For me, as you know, a hat with a survey methodology, I want to ask people, is this useful? Because I see the amount of time that it takes for our staff to be able to put the information into the system, but also for my very small team to be able to do all of the analysis, to be able to come up with data that helps to complement recommendations that are relevant. And so the survey out to the stakeholders is really important. And my hope is that through being able to bring awareness to what our agency does, what we represent, what we're open to, and want to be, you know, able to receive that feedback in a very genuine way and deliver upon it with better, improved data for communities, for organizations. It's my hope that we continue to make that reporting better time after time after time. And I know that that's not just adding chapters to it, because the results of the survey said that, you know, the majority of people don't read the entire thing in its entirety. They look at certain areas of interest or the executive summary or the recommendations because it is so long. So that was one of the areas that we got some feedback on. And I take that really seriously because I want a report that not only meets our statutory responsibilities, but that is useful, that is meaningful And that is, something that folks actually want to go to and read, to be able to have some important information about the system. But I also want that means of being able to get those insights from individuals with experience that are bringing those ideas to us and offering their recommendations through things like our stakeholder survey. So again, that comes back to the awareness of our agency, our openness, and our desire to have that feedback so that we can have more folks that we're sending these opportunities to give us feedback, and include them on that email list when we're sending things out, when we're giving notifications, when we've got new data on our up and coming data dashboards. So just continuing to, I guess, invite us, not just to present, but just to be at the table and listen. I want to come, I want to listen to what others are saying, to what others are bringing up as issues that need to be addressed, and raise my hand if I have ideas or ways I think might be able to help, or go back to the agency, go back to our leadership team, go back to my research team with, hey, we've got a challenge that I think we could help. We don't have the means today, but let's put our heads together because this is an important area that no one else is being able to have oversight or a way or a means of evaluating it.
I have a quick question for Mark, if I can. Mark, you said you actually served on the committee or so on. And a lot of people, I've only met maybe one or two persons who have ever done that. How much time is required and what kind of skill set do you need to be on a committee? Again, I'm not asking the staff, I'm asking someone who actually, we would call maybe a credible messenger who's done it. So give me a little bit more insight on that. And number one, why do you even do it? So help me with that one.
Okay, just ask. Yeah. Probably, I was trying to think about that before, probably 6 to 10 hours a month.
Okay.
Because you get 5 cases. Some of the cases are fairly easy to read and understand. And so you can get most of the cases read probably in 3 hours or less. Then your board meeting also depends on the board and how difficult the cases are. It's usually 2 to 3 hours that you sit as a board and listen to the cases, listen to the information being presented, and trying to come up with solutions. So 6 to 10 hours a month, and that's probably concentrated really within a 2-week and a half time period. By the time you get the cases, get a chance to read it, and then serve on the board.
Good.
And the boards meet at all different times of the day or night. So I mean, the board I was on, we met starting at 6 o'clock on a Monday night, as I recall.
Good.
And
Thank
so,
you.
I mean, that's
very good.
And as far as abilities or anything, it's more of an interest in the issues that are at hand and trying to come up with solutions. I mean, obviously you have to have somewhat of an ability to read and interpret what you're reading, but you also go through a lot of discussion. So
Good.
I know that those that served on it, I mean, I'm a retired school teacher at the time, who had, as I said, worked in the communities of east of 72nd Street. So where a majority of the cases that we saw actually were involved. But others, I mean, there was nurse, there was just a concerned parent, there was a CASA worker at one point in time. There was a police officer at one time. So I mean, wide variety of jobs,
Yeah.
occupations.
Thank you. Karen, I see your hands up. Karen?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could maybe take like 2 or 3 minutes just to kind of popcorn some suggestions to diversify your boards, since that's critical, and there may be some ideas in the room here. So I proposed like a community board or a community engagement committee. Other ideas out there?
I actually have a question. Who's in charge of choosing the boards that you answer to or look over the cases?
Well, ultimately, under the statute, that's my decision. However, that's more or less delegated. Mary Furness is on the Zoom tonight, and I think she's she's put a few comments into the chat. But she is her title is training coordinator, but she's really much more than that. She's kind of our volunteer coordinator, and she does processes the applications and we do background checks, and we do train. And then there's a period of time where, you know, they get to observe a board meeting, and then kind of get to decide what time, what day of the week, what time, you know, what board would they be able to fit into their schedule. And there's kind of a follow-up process. So Mary manages that, and, you know, I'm involved if there's a question or something like that. But we also have policies that we follow. And so so if you work for a child placing agency, for example, you cannot be on a board. If you work for DHHS, you cannot be on a board.
Okay, well, I have another suggestion, which is instead of using a snowball method of recruiting new board members, which just gets you more of the same, to open it up and have a more open enrollment process where you advertise, where you do some marketing, and you get some, you use some folks who understand the communities of color, how to market to and communicate with the communities of color that you're interested in having on your board, and do a big push to get a more diverse array of board members.
Thanks, Karen. I'll touch base with you actually on that offline, maybe tomorrow or later this week.
Good.
I like
Mark,
that idea.
Mark, you're next, and you probably be the last one. We have about a minute or so left here on the time. So Mark, you're next.
I was just going to say, you might check with putting an ad in the, I don't know if there's a Latino newspaper, but there is the Omaha Star, which caters aimed at the Black community. You might put an ad in there. You might check with the churches and see if you can do presentations at some of the churches, because that's where you're probably going to get a lot of the people of color that would be interested in being involved.
Good. Folks, we're down to about our last minute, and usually at the very end of our program, I'm not sure if we're going to have an evaluation today, but one of the things we do like to do is get feedback from participants about the event, but also how can we improve, and suggestions for other future community forums and engagement dealing with race and equity issues, as well as anti-racism. So we just kind of hope people can get feedback to us either via our webpage or our Facebook page. And so More Omaha is probably the place to catch up with us on a lot of information. But I really appreciate Monica Gross and Heather Woods of providing an overview of the Foster Care Review Office. And I will say I'm somewhat surprised sometimes the number of folks who have never done this in terms of engaging people on some of these issues outside of their domain. So we're kind of grateful that they've done that, as well as the participants. So there were some excellent questions and so on. As the chair of More board, is basically a volunteer board, and we do encourage people to go to our website, but I want to make a shameless plug. In January the 20th, we're going to have a major event for us called book reading called A Question of Freedom: The Families Who Challenged Slavery from the Nation Founding to the Civil War. And Dr. William Thomas is a professor in Lincoln, and he wrote a powerful book about slavery and issues about reconciliation. And also in this book, he talked about his own family's involvement in Maryland and so on what people went through. So we're encouraging people to participate in our other events, and this is going to be one of them. We also recently got a small grant from the Humanities Nebraska. We're going to bring other speakers and people to the table to have dialogue such as this. I will say emphatically, people will speak about diversity, bias, and so on, but at the end of the day, very few people talk about anti-racism and move it to another level to deal with advocacy. So we're hoping we can do a much better job of trying to change the percentages as well as the portions in our state. So we really appreciate you being here tonight. And of course, make suggestions on other events you'd like to see us cover. And as we get through this COVID-19, we may do some events in person as well as jointly through this electronic media, whether it be Facebook, Zoom, or so on. So we really appreciate you being here tonight. And we hope that you will join us again for our other events coming from more. And again, we're very happy that you were able to participate tonight. So on that note, we'd like to end by saying Baroko and have a good evening.
Thank you.